The late afternoon sun spilled across the manicured lawns of Willowbrook Estate, turning the marble pathways golden and warm as if the world itself paused to witness something forbidden. That was the moment Yarek Al-Sari, the untouchable Arab millionaire CEO known for his steel resolve and flawless reputation, stood beside a woman no one in his empire was meant to notice. Nadina Kersey, the soft-spoken black maid with a quiet grace that had always unsettled him in ways he never admitted aloud. They had married only hours earlier, in a private civil ceremony hidden beneath the glass dome of a remote courthouse outside Chicago. And now, as sunlight painted her face with a tenderness he had never seen on any boardroom wall, Yarek felt his chest tighten with an emotion powerful enough to crack the facade he'd worn since youth. No one knew. Not his board. Not his cousins. Not the journalists who worshipped and feared his name. He had just bound himself, for life, to a woman his own world would never accept, and that decision pulsed through him like a heartbeat he could finally hear for the first time. As they stepped inside the estate, silence wrapped around them, thick and electric, and Nadina's fingers trembled inside his as though she was holding back a storm. He noticed the way her eyes kept flickering toward the grand staircase, toward the portraits of Al-Sari men, stern, powerful, merciless, watching her like judges from another century. Yarek squeezed her hand gently, trying to anchor her in a house that had never felt like home to him either, but it didn't work. Because when they reached the end of the long corridor leading to the suite prepared for their wedding night, Nadina stopped, her breath shaking in her throat. "Yarek, before we go inside, I have to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely holding shape. He turned to her, expecting nerves, maybe guilt for entering a world of impossible wealth, maybe fear of gossip that would eventually explode. But instead, her eyes swam with a truth so heavy it seemed to bend the sunlight itself. "If I don't say it now," she murmured, "you might never forgive me." His pulse tightened. Every instinct he possessed, instincts sharpened in negotiations, in hostile takeovers, in boardroom wars, suddenly spiraled into something unfamiliar, dread. Nadina lifted her chin, steadying herself, and what she revealed in that quiet hallway on their wedding night would soon rip open the polished universe Yarek had built, shake the foundation of his name, and expose a truth powerful enough to bring enemies crawling out of every shadow he thought he had defeated. And it began with 4 trembling words he never expected from the woman he trusted more deeply than he trusted himself: "I was not hired." Yarek froze, every muscle tightening as Nadina's words echoed through the sunlit hallway, the late afternoon glare stretching across the polished floor like a spotlight aimed directly at her trembling soul. He searched her face, trying to understand, trying to assemble meaning from a sentence that did not belong to the woman he believed he knew better than anyone. "Not hired," he repeated, his voice low, steady, but laced with a tension that came from years of running an empire where every lie was a weapon and every truth was a trap. Nadina swallowed hard, and the tremor in her breath betrayed the weight of whatever she had been carrying for months. She stepped back from him slightly, as though needing space to peel open the truth without his nearness breaking her resolve. Outside, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air, tiny fragments suspended in stillness, like their entire future at that moment. "I didn't come to the estate as a maid," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor as if ashamed to meet his. "I came because someone sent me, someone who wanted to hurt you." Yarek felt a coldness crawl up his spine, a familiar sensation from years of corporate wars and inner family betrayals. He stepped forward, gently but firmly lifting her chin with his hand so her eyes met his. They were glistening, not just with fear, but with grief, with guilt, with something that made his chest tighten because it was unmistakably real. "Who sent you?" he demanded softly, not out of anger, but out of protective instinct that surged inside him like a storm waiting for the command to break. Nadina's lips trembled as she tried to speak. "A woman named Calire Vance," she finally said, and Yarek felt his heart jolt like a struck drum. Calire, his former head of international operations, the same woman whose calculated ambition had nearly collapsed one of his European expansions 2 years ago. She had vanished afterward, disappearing into the shadows of the financial underworld, but clearly she had never stopped watching him. Nadina continued, tears pooling at the corner of her eyes. "She found me in Detroit. She knew everything about me, about my mother's medical bills, about my debts, about how desperate I was. She offered money, more than I'd ever seen in my life. All she wanted was for me to take the maid job inside your estate and report everything I saw. Every weakness. Every pattern. Every person you trusted. Yarrick felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, heavy exhale as he realized how deeply this betrayal ran. His home. His sanctuary. His private life. All infiltrated. But looking at Nadina, her shaking hands, her breath catching, her eyes begging for understanding, he didn't feel anger the way he expected. He felt something sharper. Something more dangerous. Truth. But that's not why I'm confessing, Nadina whispered, and the way her voice cracked made something inside him soften without his permission. The moment I walked into this house, the moment I saw how you spoke to the staff, how you refused to let people feel small, how you defended that gardener boy when the inspector mocked him, I knew I couldn't do it. I stopped sending reports after the first week. Her voice lowered. Calais threatened me. She threatened my family. She told me she'd ruin me if I backed out. But I didn't care anymore, Yarrick, because I fell in love with you. And I needed you to know the truth before I stepped into your world as your wife. Silence filled the corridor, heavy and alive, as sunlight shifted across their faces like a blessing or a warning. He didn't know which. Yarrick lifted his hand, brushing away her tear with a tenderness he didn't know he possessed, and in that moment he understood that this confession wasn't betrayal, it was courage. Tremendous courage. Nadina, he murmured, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in him. You walked into my home as a spy, but you walked into my heart as something else entirely. And now I need you to trust me. Because whoever sent you, wherever she is, she has no idea who she just provoked. Nadina's breath shook again, but this time not from fear, something else. Relief. Hope. And before she could speak, the phone in Yarrick's pocket vibrated violently, the familiar tone used only by his head of security. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened, the warmth in his chest turning into cold fire. The message was simple, chilling, and perfectly timed. Sir, we have a situation at the front gate. A woman is demanding entry. She claims she knows your wife. Yarrick slowly lifted his eyes to Nadina. Her face drained of color. Then she whispered the name he already knew he would hear. Calais. The moment Nadina whispered that name, the quiet air of the estate seemed to shift, as though the walls themselves sensed the history about to unravel. Yarrick slipped his phone back into his pocket, his mind calculating at a speed that left no room for hesitation. He took Nadina's hand, firm, guiding, protective, and led her swiftly down the hall toward the east wing stairs, sunlight streaking across the marble beneath their hurried steps. Outside, through the tall windows, the sky remained bright and open, the kind of warm daylight that should have made the world feel safe, yet nothing about this moment carried safety. At the foot of the stairs, Yarrick stopped, turning to her with a seriousness that made her heartbeat stumble. Listen to me, he said quietly, his voice calm but threaded with command. From this moment on, you do not leave my side unless I tell you to. If Calais is here, she didn't come to talk, she came to corner you. She came to see if your fear is still something she can use. Nadina nodded, but her breath trembled as she whispered, She won't stop, Yarrick, she'll ruin everything. He brushed his thumb gently across the back of her hand. She can't ruin what she doesn't control. And she doesn't control you anymore. That single sentence seemed to settle something inside her, but the peace was brief. As they stepped into the main hall, Yarrick's head of security, a tall former royal guard named Lenton Ward, approached, his footsteps crisp and urgent across the floor. Sir, he said in a controlled tone, the woman at the gate refuses to leave. Claims to have information on your wife. She's tried to force her way past the guardhouse twice. Nadina flinched at the word wife, not because she doubted her place but because she knew Calais would use every weapon she had to twist those words into something painful. Yarrick lifted his chin slightly. Keep her contained, he instructed Lenton. Do not bring her inside under any circumstances, and do not let her near Nadina. I will deal with her myself. Lenton nodded, but his eyes flickered toward Nadina in subtle concern. Understood. But sir, She's not alone. Yarek's brows tightened. Meaning what? She arrived with 2 men. Armed. Concealed, but not well enough. Nadina's grip on Yarek's arm tightened like a reflex, and he instinctively shifted closer to her, stepping slightly in front of her as if his body alone could shield her from every threat on earth. I expected she wouldn't come quietly, Yarek muttered. Keep the property in lockdown. No staff outside. Cameras on full stream. I want every move recorded. As Lenton hurried off to enforce the order, Yarek turned to Nadina and saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. He placed a hand on her cheek, his voice softening. This ends today. Not our peace. Not our marriage. Just her hold on your life. Nadina's lips parted, her eyes shining with guilt. I should have told you sooner. Yarek shook his head gently. You told me the moment you trusted me enough to stand beside me. That's what matters. Then, with a decisive breath, he led her toward the front entrance, where sunlight blasted through the tall glass doors with blinding brightness. As they approached, a distant voice carried across the courtyard, a sharp, taunting tone that sliced through the calm afternoon air. Yarek al-Sari. You finally decided to face me. Nadina froze behind him, her breath shuddering as the gate came into view. There, on the other side of the steel bars, stood Calire Vance, tall, impeccably dressed, wearing sunglasses though the sun was behind her. Her posture radiated entitlement, anger, and a strange confidence that made Yarek's instincts sharpen. She smirked when she spotted Nadina. There she is, she purred. My little project. Nadina flinched, but Yarek stepped directly in front of her. Calire, he said, voice cold and measured. You are trespassing, threatening my staff, and attempting to intimidate my wife. State your business or leave now. Calire laughed softly, a sound dripping with venom. Your wife? How touching. Do you even know who she really is? Nadina sank behind him, shaking. Yarek didn't move an inch. I know enough to know you no longer deserve to say her name. Kalira's smile sharpened, her sunglasses reflecting bright daylight like shards of ice. Then let's see what you think after I tell you what she's been hiding from both of us. Nadina's breath hitched. Yarek's jaw clenched. And Kalira leaned closer to the gate, her voice lowering to something deadly. Ask her, she whispered. Ask your new bride why she wasn't just sent here to spy, but to take something from you. Nadina's knees nearly buckled behind him. Yarek exhaled slowly, fury tightening inside him like a coiled blade. Whatever truth Calire held, whatever threat she had arrived to deliver, he was prepared to confront it, but he knew Nadina was holding something back. Something she feared more than Calire. Something she feared might destroy everything they had just promised each other. And sunlight blazed across the estate as the moment of truth crept closer, waiting to be revealed. The courtyard fell into a tense, unnatural stillness, the kind that made even the sunlight feel overheated and intrusive as Yarek stepped closer to the gate, his shadow stretching long across the stone walkway. Nadina remained a single step behind him, her breath soft and uneven, her hands clasped tightly as though she were holding herself together. Kalira's smile widened as she sensed Nadina's fear, her posture straightening with the confidence of someone who believed she still owned the strings of the past. Yarek, she said with a slow, deliberate smugness, you're an intelligent man. A man who built an empire from nothing. Surely you understand by now that no one does anything for free. Yarek lifted one hand lightly, the gesture small but enough to silence her theatrics. What you sent her here to do, he replied, voice even, was wrong. You preyed on a woman's desperation to play your petty revenge game. Calire tilted her head, amused. Petty? I lost everything because of you. You removed me from your company, from your world, and you did it without hesitation. Because you tried to sabotage my operations and funnel information to my competitors, he countered. I removed you because you became a danger to the company and to yourself. Kalira's expression cracked for a brief second, bitterness flashing in her eyes before she recovered. And now, she murmured, I get to show you just how dangerous I can be. She then shifted her gaze directly to Nadina, ignoring Yarek completely. Tell him, she said sharply. Tell him what you were supposed to take. Nadina let out a small sound, half breath, half plea, and Yarek immediately turned back to her, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierceness that tried to pull her back from the edge of collapsing. Nadina, he said softly, look at me. She swallowed hard, lifting her gaze with visible effort. Yarek stepped closer, his presence a shield she could gather strength behind. Whatever it is, he murmured, you tell me, not her. Tell me in your words. Nadina's eyes shimmered with tears she was trying desperately to contain, and for a moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Kalai didn't just want me to gather information, she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of what she'd kept buried. She told me to find where you keep your global project vault, and steal the access code. Yarek felt his jaw tighten, though his face remained steady. The vault, his most guarded private archive, held decades of confidential work, humanitarian partnerships, whistleblower testimonies from exploited workers around the world, and records of corruption inside industries most people never dared touch. It was his life's work of justice hidden beneath the surface of power. If it fell into the wrong hands, not only would it destroy vulnerable communities relying on him, it would arm his enemies with the ability to dismantle the ethical foundation he had spent his life building. Kalai chuckled. There it is. The truth. Your little maid wasn't just a spy, she was supposed to take the one thing you protect more fiercely than your fortune. Nadina shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. I didn't do it, she whispered urgently. I never tried. I swear, Yarek, I never even looked for it. I couldn't betray you like that, not even in the beginning. I thought if I told you before the wedding, you might think everything I felt was a lie. Yarek reached for her hands, pulling them into his with a gentleness that was unmistakable. Look at me, he said again, his voice low, steady, unwavering. She lifted her eyes, and he saw not deceit but pain, raw, honest, unfiltered pain. You came into my life under her influence, he said, but you stayed in my life by your choice. And truth told in courage weighs more than sins born in fear. Kalai scoffed loudly. How poetic. How perfectly naive. Yarek's gaze snapped to her, and the coldness in his eyes made the air feel sharper. Kalai, whether you believe her or not doesn't matter, he said, stepping closer to the gate until only steel divided them. But you came to my home with armed men. You threatened my staff. You manipulated a woman who had nothing and forced her into your vengeance. That will cost you. Kalira's smirk faltered for the first time. What are you going to do, Yarek? Call the police. You forget, I still have every message I sent her. Every instruction. I can make it all look like your wife planned the infiltration herself. Nadina inhaled sharply, panic tightening her voice. She will twist everything, she always does. Yarek gently squeezed her hand without breaking eye contact with Kalai. You came here believing I fear your lies, he said calmly. But you underestimate one thing. And what is that? Kalai snapped. Yarek's voice dropped, quiet but lethal. I protect what is mine. At that moment, Lenton reappeared behind them, his posture rigid, his expression darkening as he approached. Sir, he said carefully, we've reviewed the perimeter feeds. There's something you need to see. The men with her, they're not just guards. Kalira's expression flickered, fear? Irritation, but she pulled her sunglasses lower to hide it. Yarek turned slightly, keeping Nadina close. What are they, Lenton? They're mercenaries, Lenton said. Private. Unlicensed. Former Intercept operatives. Nadina gasped softly. Kalira's jaw tightened. And Yarek understood instantly. Kalai hadn't come to negotiate. She had come to retrieve something, or someone, by force. And the daylight, bright and warm only moments ago, now felt like a stage light exposing every hidden weapon in the scene. Something bigger was coming. And it was coming fast. The estate air suddenly felt charged, heavy, as if every sunlit corner was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to strike. Yarek stepped in front of Nadina, his presence a living shield, his eyes narrowing toward Calais and the two mercenaries flanking her. Every instinct honed from decades of power, of boardroom battles, and silent wars around the globe sharpened in that moment into something singular. Protective, lethal focus. "Lenton," he commanded quietly. "Lock down every gate. Cameras, drones, all exits. I don't want them touching a single step inside." Lenton nodded, moving like a shadow to execute his orders, while Yarek turned back to Nadina, who clutched his arm as though afraid the world itself would tear her from him. "Stay close," he murmured. Nadina swallowed, nodding, but her gaze flickered toward Calais, whose smirk had returned, sharper, colder, dangerous. "You really believe you can protect her?" Calais hissed, stepping toward the gate, her voice cutting through the courtyard like steel. "You've built your empire on fear, Yarek, but fear has limits." Yarek's lips pressed into a thin line. "And neither does justice." The sunlight caught the mercenaries' weapons, glinting dangerously, but Yarek did not flinch. Instead, he assessed, calculated, each angle, each risk, as though the estate itself was an extension of his mind. Nadina's hands trembled against his chest, but he held her close, murmuring, "Whatever comes, we face it together." And for a moment, the world seemed to pause, the only sounds the faint rustle of leaves and the distant city hum. Then, suddenly, a shot rang out, not from the mercenaries, but from the far side of the estate, where one of the outer gates had been tampered with. Lenton's voice cracked over the radio. "Sir, they've breached the north wall." Yarek's pulse tightened, every nerve alive with tension. He grabbed Nadina's hand, leading her toward the interior courtyard, eyes scanning for any vulnerability. "Calais," he said, voice low, sharp, commanding attention, "you forced my hand. But know this, you don't get to threaten my family, my home, or the woman I married, and walk away unscathed." Kalira's smirk faltered as Yarek's gaze cut through the space between them, a predator focused on the one who dared cross him. The mercenaries adjusted their stance, weapons raised, but Yarek did not falter. Instead, he moved with precise, almost unnatural calm, guiding Nadina behind a decorative stone pillar, and then back, stepping into full daylight, every movement confident, deliberate, like a master tactician revealing a trap. "You forget," he continued, "that she chose truth over fear. That courage is not yours to manipulate." A flicker of something, panic, crossed Kalira's face, quickly replaced by a forced composure, but Yarek noticed. That split second told him everything. She had underestimated Nadina, underestimated the power of loyalty and honesty, and underestimated him. Then the first mercenary made a sudden move, stepping forward aggressively, and Yarek's response was instant. A calculated command to Lenton, a sharp hand signal, and two of Yarek's own security appeared behind the intruder, subduing him before he could fire a shot. The courtyard erupted into chaos, but Yarek moved through it like a conductor, precise, in control, his mind and body synchronized. Nadina watched, fear transforming into awe as she saw the full measure of the man she had chosen. Power tempered by protection, strength wielded for justice, not vanity. And in that moment, as sunlight reflected across the estate, highlighting every polished surface, every shadow, Yarek realized something vital. This battle, this confrontation, was not about vengeance or wealth. It was about the choice they had both made. A choice for integrity, courage, and truth. And Calais, no matter how cunning, no matter how prepared, could not break that. By the time law enforcement was quietly called in from Lenton's prearranged backup, Calais and her mercenaries had been contained, restrained by their own miscalculations, by their own arrogance. Nadina stood beside Yarek, hands still trembling, heart racing, but her eyes shone with newfound strength. Yarek placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You see," he murmured softly, "the world may test us. People may try to manipulate or destroy us. But when we act with honesty, courage, and loyalty, nothing can break us." Nadina nodded, tears mixing with a small, triumphant smile. She realized that their union, secret, unexpected, and bold, had not weakened them, as she had feared. Instead, it had forged a bond unshakable, a partnership capable of facing even the darkest threats with dignity, grace, and power. The estate's courtyard lay quiet now, the sunlight glinting off the restrained mercenaries' weapons like cold reminders of the storm that had passed. Nadina stood beside Yarek, her body still trembling, but her eyes held a resolute fire that only grew stronger with each heartbeat. Calayare Vance had been taken away under police supervision, her arrogance replaced by the kind of defeat only those who underestimate loyalty and courage could feel. Yarek finally allowed himself to exhale fully, a release that carried the weight of years of control, fear, and the constant tension of living in a world that demanded perfection at every turn. He turned to Nadina, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, the sunlight illuminating the sincerity in his gaze. "You were brave," he said softly, his voice barely above the warm daylight hum. "More than anyone else could have been." Nadina shook her head, a shy, almost guilty smile touching her lips. "I only did what felt right. I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't told you the truth, even if it meant facing her." Yarek studied her, every line of her expression, every tremor, and realized that strength often came in quiet, understated forms, the courage to admit mistakes, to confront fear, to choose integrity over survival. He led her inside the estate, walking slowly, hand in hand, as the golden afternoon light poured through the high windows, catching dust motes like fleeting sparks. The security cameras, the guards, the meticulous preparations, they all mattered. But at that moment, all that mattered was truth, trust, and the recognition that power wielded without conscience is meaningless. Yarek and Nadina paused in the central hall, and he finally allowed himself to smile, the warmth of it reflecting in her eyes. "We've survived the test," he murmured. "Not just Kalira's schemes, but every fear we carried into this marriage. And it's not over. Others will come, others will challenge. But together, with honesty and courage, we are stronger than any threat." Nadina leaned into him, letting herself feel the weight of the moment, relief, love, and pride intertwined. And in the quiet aftermath, Yarek understood the most profound truth he had ever known, that wealth, power, and influence were only meaningful when used to protect dignity, to uphold justice, and to empower those who could not defend themselves. Later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the estate in warm golds and deep shadows, Yarek spoke the words Nadina would carry forever. "Our union," he said, "is proof that the choices we make, guided by truth, loyalty, and courage, define us more than any fortune or title ever could." Nadina smiled, understanding the depth of his words. "Then let's always choose right, even when it's hard," she whispered. And in that light-filled hall, surrounded by the echoes of power, deception, and courage, a new chapter began, not just for Yarek Ulsari, the Arab millionaire CEO, or Nadina Kurzi, the woman who dared to speak the truth, but for the very idea that integrity, love, and ethical power could overcome fear, manipulation, and injustice. In a world obsessed with wealth, control, and appearances, the true measure of strength is not the empire you build, but the justice you uphold, the dignity you protect, and the courage to choose truth even when it comes at personal risk. Power is most beautiful and most enduring when wielded not for selfish gain, but to defend those who cannot defend themselves, to honor the bonds of honesty, and to illuminate the path from fear to redemption.